Building websites is a breeze with the framework as you please, easy as slicing cheese with the tools such as these. Structured pages quick, no CSS to make you sick. Use the layout that you pick, navigation helps you click. Icons, buttons, you can tap your containers, close the gap. Responsive gridding is a snap, you'll be launching off the map. Blasting off with Bootstrap, blasting off with Bootstrap.
Welcome back to Blasting Off with Bootstrap. This is level 3, typography. So what exactly is typography? Well, Wikipedia defines it as the art and technique of arranging text on the page to make it the most appealing. In the web world, when we talk about typography, we're generally concerned with fonts, including what font, the size, the position, color, and how to make them work together. If we take a look at our page so far, we'll see that it's not using the default browser font. That's because this bootstrap.css file that we included, well, it overrides all the fonts used on our page. If you're familiar with CSS, this style definition will shed a little light on what Bootstrap is doing for us. There's a lot going on here, including changing the font to use this Helvetica Neue typeface, and it's also changing the default size and even the color to this kind of neutral gray, which is a lot easier on the eyes. Now, all of those styles, they're being applied to our entire page, but any of them can also be overridden. For instance, our H1 tag, well, it isn't 14 pixels. We overrode that font size by using a tag, H1, that is setting the font size larger. Using tags is one way to override Bootstrap styles, but there's another way using some typography CSS classes that Bootstrap provides. Let's see how we can make our lead text stand out a little bit more by using one of these classes. Here's the relevant part of our page, the paragraph just below our H2 tag where we describe our company. This sentence isn't a header, but we do want to make it stand out more than the other sentences on the page. To do that, we'll add a class of lead to this paragraph tag. This will actually increase the font size and the weight, but it'll also add a little more space around the element, kind of giving it a little breathing room. If we compare our paragraph tag without using lead and with it, they do seem kind of similar. The font size for our lead paragraph is 50% larger though, making it stand out compared to all of the other paragraphs on our page. Another characteristic of good typography involves font alignment. Now, Bootstrap has a couple of classes that can help us with that as well. Let's take a look at our featured items to see how they could help us there. They're okay, and it's nice that our Book Today element is centered, but what if the text within them was also centered? Let's give it a try and see what that would look like. Here's our div row for our 3 featured items. We'll try centering all text within this row. In order to do that, we'll use a text alignment class for our row, which will affect all of the text within that row. In this case, we want to center the text, so we'll add a class of text center to the div. Well, what if we had only wanted to center the H3 tag? Well, we could have added a text center class to that element instead. In this case though, by adding the class here, it will center all of the headers and all of the paragraphs within this row. Additionally, Bootstrap has a few other alignment classes that can help us out for aligning left or right, or even justifying text, which spaces your text out so it's flush against both the right and the left sides of the screen. Let's open our new design up in a browser and see how it looks. Nice! All the elements in the row are being centered by adding just that one class. Each is being centered within its element using the full number of columns available to it. But since we got rid of that image in small and extra small mode, this page is looking a bit bare. What if we added some icons that show up next to our features to really draw the eye? Usually, that would mean going out to search for some images, right? Making sure that they're legal to use, adding in image tags, and generally a lot more work. Let's see what that process is if we're using Bootstrap. Remember this font folder that came with Bootstrap? Well, this is actually an entire library of icons. If you think about it, a font is a mapping from a character code to some font image. Code 41 might be a capital A in fonts like Helvetica and Times New Roman, but in this cool Glyphicon font, Code 41 might map to a tag image or a profile image. We don't need to know which codes map to which icons to use them, luckily. Bootstrap provides CSS classes that we can add to our HTML when we need to use these icons. This Glyphicon library, which you would usually have to pay for separately, is actually free with Bootstrap and contains 200 icons you can use. Oh, and if you're wondering why there's so many fonts in this folder, well, blame web browsers. The .wav file, or Web Open Font Format, is now used by all modern web browsers, but there's a few fallbacks in there for older versions of Internet Explorer and a few other special cases. So how do we go about using these icons? In our case, we want this icon to show up right above our Book Today header. To add an icon, we'll need an element to which to attach a class. We'll use an I element for this. This element was originally used for italic text, but it's become a standard practice to use it for icons as well. We need for this element to use the Glyphicons font rather than that Helvetica New font like the rest of our page. To do that, we'll add in a class of Glyphicon to this element. If we open this up and view it now, we're not really seeing anything. In order for an icon to show up, we'll still need to specify which icon we want to use. Our paragraph here is all about travel, so we'll go ahead and add a briefcase icon here, since it kind of resembles luggage. To do that, we'll add the Glyphicon briefcase class to our I element. This is a pattern you'll see very often in Bootstrap, applying two classes to accomplish a single task. This helps keep the Bootstrap CSS file much smaller. In this case, the Glyphicon class is what's setting the font family we'll use, while the Glyphicon briefcase class, that is actually specifying which icon we can use. Let's go ahead and add icons to our other featured items. We'll follow the same pattern as before, creating an I element for Go Anywhere and give it a class of Glyphicon. If we head over to the Bootstrap webpage, we can pick out another icon and find the associated class for it. In this case, I'm going to add the Glyphicon random class, which creates this crossed paths icon. For our rocket bus, we'll follow this same pattern again and pick out an icon. There is no rocket icon, unfortunately, but this paper plane icon conveys a similar meaning. Now, if we really needed a rocket icon, we could go find another library that provides additional icons like Font Awesome. I'm okay with our plain icon for now though, so let's stick with it. Let's see what our page looks like with these shiny new icons. So we're all excited to see our new icons in action. So we open up a new page in a browser, and oh no, they turned out much smaller than we might have expected. How do we increase the font size of these icons? Well, if these were images, we could just set the height and the width on them and we'd be fine, but that won't work in this case. Remember earlier on, we mentioned how Bootstrap sets the default font size of our page to 14 pixels. Well, turns out that's also setting the size of our icons since they're also a font. But the good news is we can override the font size of our icons by adding a very small amount of CSS and increasing the font size. Let's give it a shot. First, we don't want to be editing the bootstrap.css file. If we ever wanted to update Bootstrap, we don't want any of our custom changes to be in there. Instead, we'll add another link to a new main.css file, which we'll create for all of our customizations. Next, we'll add one additional class to our row of features, and we'll call it Features, of course. This could be whatever you want. It's not a class provided by Bootstrap, right? We just need some way of identifying this section of the page. Then we can create this css/main.css file and define a single CSS selector of .features.glyphicon. This just means that we'll only be styling glyphicons that are inside of an element with a class of features. In this case, we'll increase the font size to 32 pixels, making them stand out quite a bit from their surrounding text. It's important to note here that if we left out the .features part, we would be styling all Glyphicons on the page. At the moment, that would be okay, but it's a best practice to only style what you need. Alright, so now we can open this up in a browser and see that our icons are looking great. They're big enough to add some distinction to our page, but also space it out, adding a little more breathing room. Now, because these icons are a font, there's some nifty customizations we can do with them. Let's check a few of those out. If our page had a different color scheme or had a dark background, then having these dark icons wouldn't really work, right? We can set the color of these icons in the same way